Hello! Welcome to the second chapter of Samurai of Hyuga. I'm gonna be continuing this series because it was really fun to edit and read out, and hopefully I'll improve my out loud reading skills and my editing skills. So I hope you enjoy. If you haven't seen the first chapter, or listened to the first chapter, I should say, I'd recommend going back and doing that, because context, you know? Okay, let's begin the second chapter of Samurai of Hyuga. Chapter 2, the Shugenja. The trouble with sliding doors made of washi paper was that you couldn't slam them open to convey anger. I held in my frustrations and gently eased the door aside. After that meaningless waste of time downstairs, I was long overdue for some rest and relaxation. The kid was just where I thought she'd be, flat on the floor with a pile of scrolls. What a bookworm. The kid had a name, and an expensive one at that. Masami Hashimoto. They're one of the most powerful families in Hyuga. To get that wealthy meant they must have cornered a very lucrative area of the market, though for the life of me I couldn't figure out what. Masami was either oblivious or just didn't care, and concerned herself more with the ancient text that looked like fancy squiggles to me. You certainly took your time down there. It's unfortunate that I must translate these scrolls alone, unprotected, whilst my bodyguard gets herself intoxicated. I waved aside the complaint and flopped on the floor. Compared to the hardened dirt my back was accustomed to sleeping upon, this mat made from rice straw was absolute bliss. There's futons in the other room, you know. Masami muttered while squinting at a partially faded scribble. I arched my head over for a visual confirmation. It was only early in the evening, but as soon as my backside touched that cotton-padded mattress, I'd be out like a candle in a windstorm. I heard my stomach growl, and for once it wasn't my own. The kid hadn't eaten. Impulsive has increased. Even scholars need to eat, kiddo. Even the elegant sort who spent all day sitting around had to eat from time to time. Usually the problem was that they ate too damn much and bloated up like the Oyamas. I hate to see a couple from my old stomping ground let themselves go, but some common folk couldn't just enjoy luxury, they had to engorge it. Not hungry. The human embodiment of a stubborn mule remarked coldly, but I knew better than to take anything she said in that tone at face value. That being said, I was hired to be her bodyguard, not her babysitter. So what I was about to do wasn't so much from the goodness of my heart as it was from personal self-interest. The self-interest of not having to deal with a whiny, agitated child all night. I rolled my sleeves up and made my way outside. The Sleeping Duck was renowned for its majestic ponds, stocked with an array of beautiful fish for the wealthy to marvel and toss food at. They would pay top market prices for the privilege of being served those same fish. To me, that sounded sort of stupid. I think I'll take out the middleman. My fingers cut through the cool pond water like a hawk's talons, clutching themselves around a particularly fattened koi. This carp was white with beautiful red blotches, but more importantly, slow and easy to grab. Plucking that bad boy out of the water took more than a little shoulder strength. It had to be 20 pounds. I was now dealing with a flopping, giant animal that was fighting for its life. How did I kill this thing? I spiked it by driving my katana through its brain. Finesse has increased. As much as I hated to admit it, this wouldn't be the first time I've used my katana for this purpose. A noble samurai would score me, but he'd be the first asking for seconds once I grilled this carp. That summed up samurai and their Bushido code quite well, actually. I was fairly certain I had hit the koi's brain with my initial stab, but I wedged it around inside there just to make sure. After that was done, and I proceeded to bleed out its main artery with a secondary cut, right where the neck meets the bottom. Blood squirted out in a stream, and I pulled the head back, the still beating heart forcing the red liquid out in spurts. This whole ordeal might have caused a weaker woman to lose her appetite. As for me, I was coming down with a bad case of the munchies. While I had done my best to make sure no one was around, there were always prying eyes in places like these. Or even worse, ninjas drinking tea. I made sure to hurry my catch back to the room before being seen.
Baka, how could you?
After all that work acquiring dinner, this was the thanks I got. Anger erupted from Masami in a shriek. Her eyes started watering as a tiny fist flew in my direction. I was so surprised at this reaction that I didn't get the chance to dodge, especially not with a giant fish in my hands. The kid could really use some work on her left hook, but I'd save my criticisms for later. How did I respond? Stop acting like a child. Stoic has increased. What did it mean to be a child? I didn't actually know, so this was only a guess on my part. When I was young, us orphans had to keep one eye open as we slept for fear that the older boys would catch us unawares. Losing the handful of coins you had was bad, but it could always be worse. I didn't need to tell you where the older girls were. You grow up fast when you're poor.
Look at these scales. Have you any concept of how many summers this majestic creature has had?
Masami grabbed the fish from my clutches and nearly fell over from its weight. She then proceeded to pet the thing, or at least that was what it looked like to me. It was just a fish, but the kid was starting to get me curious. 2 or maybe 3? They fatten these koi up with leftovers and serve them when the season's right. Not a bad cycle. That was my conclusion in any case. If I owned the sleeping duck, I'd turn these pretty-looking ponds into a fish farm. But then again, I'm a bit more practical than these wealthy types. Masami held a hand up and whispered a short prayer that I didn't catch. She laid the fish gently atop a blank, rolled-out scroll and began writing strange symbols around it. At least she had the decency to tell me what she was up to.
As you've deemed it before, I'm about to do another of my Shugenja tricks, and you're wrong about the age.
Masami grumbled as she diligently wrote calligraphy in an odd formation. This was only the second time I've witnessed her use her power, so I stared intently as if I could puzzle any of it out. The writing stopped, and again the Shugenja placed her palms together in prayer. The character turned from black to bright red, and the sound of sizzling reached my ears. The unmistakable smell of cooking fish drifted up my nose, and I let out a breath of air I didn't realize I was holding back. I was just glad that we were finally going to be able to eat the darn thing.
It was nearly a century old. 100 summers of life ended like this.
The disgust in her voice was hardly hidden and wrought with sadness.
May its spirit swim on in the afterlife.
Even a rugged ronin like me could feel bad over a fattened carp, it turned out. My eyes stared over Masami, who looked quite different in the sun's waning light. Long, black strands of hair draped to her stomach. Bangs cloaked her forehead right down to the eyebrows. Her skin was white as porcelain, though not flawless. The summer sun was relenting on those with a delicate complexion. She wasn't particularly fat nor skinny, but she had a babyish face, with those chubby cheeks of hers to blame. As for her physique, there wasn't much of one. Whereas most Hyugan women are just over 5 feet in height, Masami was fortunate to be over 4. Add that to a non-existent bust, and the kid certainly had more room to grow. The red kimono she favored wearing was darker than most of the summer fashions, though styled in the ever-popular pink sakura leaves. Appearance-wise, it was certainly pretty. especially with the white lily clipped behind her ear. However, it was too flashy and too long lengthwise for my liking. If you wanted to keep a low profile and not attract attention, you didn't wear silk that fishwives would hawk their husbands for. You also didn't want to trip over the low lining if they decided to chase on after you for it. Those women were nasty, and not just with their mouths.
Cease your staring this instant. I will not hear another word about my attire either.
Masami stared at me defiantly, knowing just how contentious this particular subject matter was. I had wanted her out of that outfit from day one, and I didn't mean that in a dirty way either. She gave my robes the stare down in return, and I only just now remembered what I had on.
Wherever did you come across such an atypical Haori? I do hope you realize what the meaning of hypocritical means, my apricot Ronin.
She was talking about my orange kimono jacket, a gift from the Oyamas and a reminder of that bizarre affair. Now would be a good time to talk to Masami about it, but I wasn't sure if I wanted her to worry. What's a bodyguard to do? I won't burden her with my problems. Chivalrous has increased. There's no need to concern yourself. It looks as if the koi is ready to eat. A group of ninjas led by a foreign-looking woman. There was no benefit to worrying the kid over such things. I may be new at this bodyguarding business, but I take my job seriously. You can call it duty and dress it up with honorifics, but the fact of the matter is, I'm a professional.
Fine. Excuse me for caring.
Masami's mood went sour, and I whispered a silent apology. This was far from the first time this had happened. I've kept the details about my past hidden from my traveling companion, and that didn't mesh well with her inquisitive mind. But my task here wasn't to be her friend, but her protector. I often have to remind myself of that. The smell of good food never lets a foul mood linger for long, and Masami's fit seemed to subside. Let's carry on with dinner then. I believe I will retire early tonight. It was a plan of action I intended to follow, though it turned out a blissful night's sleep was too much to ask. Overstuffed with as much koi as I could keep down, I laid atop my futon not unlike a beached whale. My vision already started to blacken from the corner of my eyes. Sleep's alluring embrace was cooler than a woman's, but lasted longer and didn't bring back bitter memories. I wanted to lose myself in it, but unfortunately I couldn't. Call it a bad habit, but I had lived and traveled alone for most of my adult life. Sleeping atop a futon was odd enough. Sleeping in the same room with another person, that was something I had just never gotten used to. I could have my arms wrapped around a cute geisha's bosom and still not be able to dream peacefully. It was childish now, but I never slept until I knew I was the last one awake. No chance of being attacked or mugged or having my blankets stolen. Old orphan habits died hard. And judging from the uneasy breathing coming from Masami, sleep wasn't going to come anytime soon. I'd wait her out if I had to, but it turned out that I didn't need to wait for very long. The futon beside me started to rustle ever so quietly. It was a slow and drawn-out rustling that just didn't sound right to me. Sure enough, Masami got up and out while trying to make as little noise as possible. If that wasn't suspicious enough, I felt her gaze against my closed eyes as I faked a deep slumber. She even checked my breathing pattern. Thorough little brat. After she was successfully fooled, the Shugenja started to gather her scrolls and other belongings from the living room. I had to make a choice. Did I confront her now, or did I tail her to see what sort of secrets my pint-sized partner had gotten herself into? See what happens. Calculated has increased. I was more than a little curious as to what Masami had deemed necessary to hide from me. What didn't she want me to know about? Why keep it from your bodyguard? Did she not trust me enough? Those thoughts would keep me awake and out of sleep's clutches. I rose from my futon quietly and peered into the living room. Masami diligently packed away her scrolls and ink into her knapsack, along with a change of clothes. This appeared like it was going to be more than a nightly jog. I was mentally prepared to stalk a miner through the city in the middle of the night. When did I become such a creep? Loud knocks from the front door sharpened up the nerves that my full stomach and respite had dulled. It was late for visitors, and judging by the number of shadows behind that screen door, we didn't have enough tea ceremony cushions for everyone. Did I let the kid answer, or did I? I answered. Protective has increased. This all smelled of trouble and stale fish, but I was only certain of the latter. Even still, I was Masami's bodyguard and couldn't allow her to get herself into a potentially dangerous situation. I stepped out of the bedroom and was about to make for my katana when the door slid open. The leader of this group had his head shaved at the front and the rest held back into a top knot. In other words, a full-fledged samurai. And like all samurai, he had a retinue of retainers. 5 men stood at his back, wielding the pole-arm weapons called sasumata, typically non-lethal weapons the police use to capture suspected criminals. These weapons had weird assortments of barbs at the tip, which made them great for grabbing onto kimonos. Didn't work half bad on the bare skin either, just hurt a whole lot more. Another figure emerged, squeezing between several of the retainers that towered over her. It was a little girl in a peach-colored kimono with a white obi wrapped around her waist. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, with tears streaming down like raging rivers. Worst of all, she held out her tiny hand and pointed at me in a very accusatory fashion.
Oto-san, she did it. She killed Gil-sama.
The man with the bad haircut placed his hands on his sword, ready to draw it at a moment's notice. This lovely living room was getting far too crowded, and I found myself caught between a prison sentence and a half-eaten piece of fish. I had to say something. Impulsive has increased. You're going to need to specify. I've killed lots of people. I raised my hands lazily and placed a wide grin on my face. My primary goal was to display confidence, but pissing off one of Heisen's dogs was a bonus I never passed up. Gil-sama. The honorific of Sama was reserved for highly respected, godlike entities. While I've been in the assassin business for a while, it would be the first time I killed someone bearing such a title. Or should I say something, as the half-eaten giant fish comes to mind. If assassinations were always this tasty, I wouldn't have quit that line of work. You scum! My father's father, the great Yusuke Morita, dwelled within that ancestral koi. I'll kill you for this dishonor. Veins burst out from his overly generous forehead. He unsheathed his katana and raised it into the ready position. I glanced over at my partner in crime. Masami was digging around in that knapsack of hers, but unless she had a shinobi smoke bomb in there, we were out of luck. I slowed my breathing and took a moment to analyze the situation. Thinking in the midst of battle could get you killed, but not thinking before a battle began. That was suicide. 5 Sasumata wielders blocked the only exit out of this luxury suite, an oversight the architect didn't account for. An enraged samurai father stood in fighting stance beside a sobbing little girl. Behind me was a table with my katana and roughly 10 pounds of stale fish. To my right was an undersized Shugenja with 2 slips of paper in her hands and something to say.
Yuko, press this protective talisman against your brow.
Masami thrust a strip of parchment into my hands, which looked to be covered with strange letters I had no hope at understanding. When I thought of talismans, I thought of expensive jewels and ornate medallions, not scribbles on the back of hot spring brochures. Did I follow the kid's advice, or did I do things my own way? My way. I can't let them know what Masami is. Protective has increased. Let me handle this. Don't let them know what you are. I knew enough about Shugenja to know that they belonged to the army. They were too dangerous for the government to let them roam freely. There was a reason why Masami needed a bodyguard in the first place. I wasn't entirely sure what her circumstances were, but keeping her identity secret was a priority. Unfortunately, the kid didn't agree with me. I'm not a helpless lamb awaiting the butcher, so cease speaking to me as if I were. A distinct display of dislike arose from Masami's features. I guess you could call it strong dislike, considering that she shook visibly. I didn't have time to worry about hurting her feelings when I was in the middle of saving us both. Her outrage provided enough of a distraction for me to make a break for my weapon. I could feel the sudden jerk of sandals against tatami mats behind me. My opponent would take this opportunity to close distance. I had two options on the table, perhaps the most difficult decision I've ever had to make. While most sane individuals would have gone for the obvious choice, I went for the aquatic animal instead. There was a method to my madness. I had found that unconventional attacks worked best against traditional-minded opponents, and no warrior was more traditional than a samurai. So, needless to say, he didn't see it coming when I tossed a giant carp into his face. He was getting real intimate with his grandfather's guts, as the uneaten and less tasty insides of the koi splattered and flew with the wind. The fishy-smelling stink made even me nauseous, and I was upwind. The samurai's daughter screamed at the sight of Gilsama's mid-air desecration, and again as the fish intestines covered her pink kimono. It was a deafening noise that no doubt woke up every occupant in the sleeping duck, which meant Masami and I had to leave. Fast. I snatched and drew out my blade in a whip-like motion. Closing the distance between myself and the samurai was easy. Halting the katana right before I chopped his neck off wasn't. The sharp edge rested a hair's breadth above his collarbone. He was helpless, but still alive. A few years ago I wouldn't have thought twice about taking his life, but I'm different now. I still felt that thrill as my katana rested beside the samurai's neck, but I resisted. That euphoric surge of power you get over another human being. I had defeated that addiction. I had killed that demon inside of me already. I was a bodyguard now, so when my opponent bowed his head in defeat and lowered his weapon, I accepted it. There was no job to finish, no excuse to give in to that sensation anymore. His little girl looked at me while crying her eyes out, like I was a monster. Her father spoke humbly, a noble yet defeated warrior. I don't know what you are, but you've bested me in combat. If you spare my life, I swear to let you and your companion leave here safely. Do you accept? To his credit, he kept a strong and even tone, even as my blade pressed against him. Being stalwart was an amicable virtue, but being slow off the draw was a sin that would get him killed. Maybe he'd realize his best swordsmanship was behind him and retire his katana to the sword rack in his family's shrine. Or maybe he wouldn't, just like yours truly.
She accepts, I assure you. We apologize for this disruption and shall be on our way forthwith. Ayasu minasai.
Masami intervened and all but dragged me out. I understood her desire to smooth matters over, but did she really have to wish him a good night? It hurt our intimidation factor substantially. I lacked the faith that Masami had in the samurai's promise and expected those retainers to try and jump us on the way out. But they didn't move a muscle. Not that I give them much credit. It was more out of fear than discipline. Perhaps I was even scarier than I thought.
That's the end of chapter 2. Next chapter is chapter 3, Kabuki House Drama.
That was a fun chapter. That's like my favorite part in the book, where you get the choice to just fucking throw their dead grandfather at them. That's my favorite. I'm a bad person. Anyways, from now on at the end of the episodes, I'm gonna display what the stats are for, like, what the stats are, because every time you make a decision, it changes your stats, as I've been saying, like impulsive increased or protective increased, that kind of stuff. So at the end, I'll show you what it is. Thank you for tuning in to the second chapter. Third chapter coming soon, since that was a pretty short one. Bye. Ayasamina-sai. Am I intimidating yet?